I invite you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Matthew, the 23rd chapter. And we're going to read verses 23 through 24. I'm reading from the American Standard Version, 1901. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and anise and cumin, and have left undone the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. But these you ought to have done, and not so have left the other undone. Ye blind guides that strain out the gnat and swallow the camel. We're in the midst of this 23rd chapter of Jesus denouncing those who were authorities of the law, that were connected with that law in a special way, scribes who would write down what the law said, they studied it. The Pharisees, who by their very definition of their name were separatists, as they are separated unto God's law. They were the ones that are going to follow that law. But he calls such men, scribes, Pharisees, he calls them hypocrites. And we think about hypocrites and hypocrisy as being one who puts a kind of a mask up on their face, that they do not want you to see what they really are inside, and so you're not able to see what they really are. So a mask goes over there. But as you look closer to Jesus' remarks, it's not about me, brother hypocrite or sister hypocrite. It's about you. Because I see you have an eye problem. Because Jesus says you're blind. You're blind. No, you just don't see what's inside me. It's not about me, it's about you. If you're the hypocrite, it will be about me if I am a hypocrite. And so this evening I would like to look at that statement with the understanding that what we're seeing is not, well, you kind of pulled the wool over our eyes. No, the hypocrite has the mask here. You're not able to see what's truly there, but he's got the problem. He's got an eye problem. And what we're going to do is look at that. And let me tell you how big a problem it is, Jesus says. When he says you're blind guides, he gives us a description of what the problem is. You strain out a gnat from their wine and from their drinks. They would strain out, the little gnat could not get into their drink because they're that precise. He said, well, that's pretty good eyesight. I can't see that well. But look at the rest of the picture. Especially if you were a Jew. That here you strain out a gnat, but in this feast you just swallowed a camel. That's an unclean beast. And you swallowed the whole camel. And when we begin to see what Jesus is speaking about in being blindness, oh, you got an eyesight that's acute, but you're such a hypocrite because the bigger things like the camel, which you Pharisees and you scribes would never eat under the law of Moses, that law that you promote, you eat it. You eat it. We're in the midst of denouncement that Jesus says, and you're kind of like whited sepulchres. You're kind of like people that clean the outside of the platter, but the inside is full of iniquity. That indeed you look good on the outside, you pull that mask over, we just see what you want us to see, but you're really blind because your actions are such that anybody who contemplated you would realize you're blind. You just ate a camel. You just ate a camel. And I think there's lessons that we can learn from looking at that. But that's not the only thing he sets forth there. He says, you've left undone the weightier matters of the law. That's what you praise, isn't it? And you want us to see that. But you left undone the weightier matters of the law. Well, what do we see in Jesus' statement? That idea, well, they're kind of blind about things. Oh, they're real particular. They tithe tiny herbs. The Bible had taught in the law, the law of Moses that they were to tithe the fruit of their land and never mention about herbs. Jesus doesn't condemn it, but his idea of the produce there, like grain, and they have animals and livestock. They were to tithe those things, a tenth of it. But what they do would take out 10 stalks of little herbs, and they would set that aside. They would set that aside. But then the weightier matters of the law, and that word denotes the weight of something, that indeed you've left those undone. You just left them behind. You don't even worry about them. And yet they are more important. Please listen closely. They said their weightier matters is more important than you tithing something that we really didn't specify in the old law, but it's fine. You should have been doing all of it. All of them were important, like serving others and listening to Jesus speak are both important. But Mary chose the better of the two. This is more important, these weightier matters, because they're dealing with your fellow man. You can tithe this unto God, and that's great. You should be doing that. That's what you think you ought to do. Tithe that. That's coming out of the fruit of your land. But you've left something completely undone. It's like swallowing a camel, an unclean beast. You've done that, but you're real particular in certain things. You've got a problem with your eyes. You've got some eyesight problems. And you've left undone the weightier matters. Let's look at those weightier matters for a moment and realize, what were they? And what we can see is that here is something that wants justice, and you want mercy, and you want faithfulness. With this word faith is sometimes describing like a faithful God. Those are things that God doesn't need from you. In fact, he doesn't need anything from you. He didn't need the herbs. But those are things that our fellow man needs. And he just left it behind. I am real particular in my relationship with God. And the one that needs justice, the one that needs mercy, that one needs to have a plan, faithfulness based upon your promises, it doesn't even matter to you. You look good on the outside, but inwardly you don't ever get around helping anybody else. And so we begin to see in Matthew 23 and verse 23 those weightier matters. And the first one is indeed justice. This comes out in helping and how you treat the poor. Amos is a great example of this in chapter 5 of Amos. If you're going to the idea God will be with you, if you seek that which is good, you stay away from evil, he'll be there with you. And in doing that, you are to make sure that justice is at your gate. Justice is at your gate. A little bit later in that chapter, in verse 24, he's summing up something. They had their solemn feast. Oh, they would worship God. And they'd come together and sing their songs. He says it's just noise. I'm not happy with your solemn assemblies, your solemn feast. It's just noise. You've heard songs of praise. They're just noise to me. Let justice roll like a river. Let justice roll like a river. Let it come forth as a stream. Seems to be a contrast, but let this. Here's what you're offering. What's left is God's justice. Prepare to meet your God, as he said earlier in chapter 4. Judgment is coming. What's interesting, you look on websites today and you see people going for social justice. They will use Amos 5 in verse 24. Let justice roll like a river. Let it flow like a stream, being right and just. They look at that as simply, social justice needs to continue. When the verse I think they really want is let justice be at the gate. That's where we rule. That's where we make decisions about the poor. And this passage is said, God is coming in judgment. It's not let us just justice roll some more and more. It's God's justice coming upon people who abused the poor. Just how bad were they against the poor? In Amos, the 2nd chapter, in verse 6 and 7, they sold righteous people for silver. Here were people in need. Maybe they didn't have enough money, but they were righteous. You have the money, and you'll give them a silver, and they'll be your slave. You sell the needy. They don't have anything. They need a pair of shoes. They become your slave. You pant for the dust of the earth that is upon the poor man's head. Verses 6 and 7. Justice in Amos is rolling from God if they don't turn from their ways. But that's just an example. Are we bothered by the poor? Are we bothered by people in need? Or we take advantage of them? Justice should be at the gate, and it wasn't. They were doing that which is evil. Here people didn't have another choice. And there was the idea of oppression, not help, that was taking place among so-called God's people. The second way to your matter is just mercy, kindness, not wanting to cause more pain. And one of the great examples in our Bible is the Good Samaritan. It's a great example of mercy being extended. But please note how that is given in Luke the 10th chapter. Here was a priest, here was a Levite, and here was a man. He'd been going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It was a very steep move, and a lot of rocks, and a lot of place for robbers. And he was robbed. The Bible says he was half dead. Half dead. Pretty bad shape. And the Levite, the priest and the Levite, they just passed on the other side. They couldn't be bothered. It's not, they're just kind of staying away. You leave undone the weightier matters of the law. And here is the Samaritan, the lowly Samaritan, the hated Samaritan. That indeed here is a man in need, regardless of if he's a Jew, may not be a Samaritan, who cares? He's half dead. And he needs some help. And what does that man do? He took care of every need that the man needed at that time. He was in pretty bad shape, but he took the wine, the oil to soothe the wounds, the wine to keep it from being full of germs, and bandaged him up. That's not all of it. He just, you're bandaged up now, go on your way. He put him on his own beast and said, go. No, he went with him, but he rode on the beast. And they go to the inn. Here's some shekels of money, 2 shekels of money, and I give that to you. Take care of his needs now. And if it's even more needed on that bill, just put on the bill. When I come back, I will take care of that. Could you tell me one thing that the man needed that he didn't get from that one Samaritan in that time of need? He took care of all of those things. It's not like, well, I helped you, I stopped and got you flat and so forth, and you got to be on your way, and you didn't realize that, I need gas too. I don't care, I take care of the flat, just go. But there's all sorts of needs that might be there. You appreciate someone's, what else do you need? What else do you need? Mercy is the kindness that goes the second mile. Who proved neighbor, to love your neighbor as yourself? How would you like to be treated at that time? They go the second mile. I don't know if my parents remember this. I will never forget it. We're in a green Rambler station wagon back in the day. We're in Louisiana, and I don't want to get too far in it, but somebody got stuck in the ditch. And we were there at nighttime, me and my sister, my mom and dad. And I remember Dad getting out and having to go to these houses, and I would hear his voice, hello in the house. And all we'd hear is dogs barking. That's what I heard. There was a man Didn't have much. He had a one-room place. And I remember we were in one room. He came out there and he saw what we needed. He took us to his house. We spent the night in his house. Mom and Dad drank chicory coffee. I would never touch it. But it seemed like everybody was awake all night. I don't know why. The next day, he gets the change, gets Dad out, gets Mom out, gets us all out. Now, we could have been left in that car because at that time, by the time we were able to go to his house, we had massacred a bunch of mosquitoes. That green Rambler was speckled with bread. And we could stay there all night. But here's a man that did all he could, and he went to Sacramento. He didn't leave us out in the Rambler, said, I'll pick you up in the morning. I sure did stop by and see how you're doing. I didn't at least go pass you by. And I will never forget that man. I'll never forget that moment. It's kindness. Kindness extended to strangers. And we see people like that in our world today, and it's wonderful to see. That's what we are to be as God's people. As we have that opportunity and ability to help. Don't leave them half dead. Don't leave them halfway through being helped. Just take it all the way as much as you can. And that's what this man did. And what Jesus says, who proved neighbor to this? Well, it's the one that showed kindness. Go thou and do likewise. My neighbor is the man or the woman in need at that moment of time. That's my neighbor. That's how I would like to be treated. And that's how we're to treat one another. What are these men of the law doing? Kind of what the priest and the Levite did. They just went there, passed it by. No, we're showing mercy. It's expressing in our lives. It's showing because when people are hungry, there's a sense of we're going to help in that need, because Matthew the 12th chapter, we find in chapter 12 and verse 1 that Jesus' disciples, they were hungry and they began to pluck ears to eat out in the fields. And they're being accused by the Pharisees. Oh, you broke the law. You do that which is unlawful to do on the Sabbath, as if they're kind of tilling the land. No, they just got something to eat. And there becomes the controversy on that day. And what Jesus is saying, David ate showbread, he sinned. You're going to condemn David at that time? Well, they don't condemn these people. And who are these people? Verse 7, but be it known what it means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Ye would not have, if you desired that, you would not have condemned the guiltless. They won't speak against David, but they speak against my disciples. And they are the ones that were guiltless. It was lawful when you went through a man's field that you could pluck up an ear of grain for your hunger. You're not going to take a sickle and kind of get a bunch of produce that day, but you could eat. That's the law. They didn't do anything wrong. You could eat on the Sabbath. And he said, mercy, not sacrifice. I desired that. And they were so bent on condemning and law and applying that law, they forget the weightier matters of taking care of someone who is indeed hungry and needs help. Let's take it to the spiritual. In Matthew the 9th chapter, verses 10 through 13, we find Jesus being condemned because he's eating with sinners. And here they are, and when the Pharisees saw it, they said to the disciples, why eateth your teacher with the publicans and sinners? Why are you doing that? That's not right. That's not being faithful unto God. He said, have you not heard that they that are whole have no need of a physician, but they that are sick? Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. They need a physician. And here are men that have lost souls. I need to come in contact with them. He wasn't fellowshipping them in their evil ways. They weren't practicing idolatry. But he was with them because mercy is not just extended because people are hungry. It's because people are lost in their sins. And mercy is something that which says, oh, there's a kindness. I care about your soul, like I care about your stomach, like I care about your situation. That's what God's people do, that care about the weightier matters of the law. James tells us that judgment is without mercy to him that shows no mercy. James 2:13. Now we want justice, don't we? And there's a sense of idea of justice. And here is judgment that comes, ruling in a just way. Judgment is without mercy. There'll be no mercy extended in judgment if you don't show mercy to other people. Because he says mercy now glories in judgment later. What we do now in our life, we don't sit there and say, let it go. We don't have to worry about mercy, but we're going to tithe. We're going to be making sure we're walking particularly as the law says, and we forget our relationship with others, especially this thing called mercy. I tell you, there was a man and his family that didn't do that in the New Testament. And here we're under the New Testament law, but the principle is still there. In 2 Timothy, the first chapter, Paul writes to Timothy and talks about Onesiphorus. Talking about Onesiphorus and his family. And what he says is that, verse 16, the Lord grant mercy unto the house of Onesiphorus, for what did he do in this life? Hey, I want him to grant mercy when God comes in judgment, because he oft refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chain. When he came to Rome, he sought me out. He wasn't afraid to be identified with me, maybe be put in jail himself. He was there to show kindness. He was there to show mercy. In verse 18, the Lord grant unto him to find mercy of the Lord in that day. And how many things he ministered at Ephesus, thou knowest very well. Sometimes I've looked at that passage and said, well, we're going to come to the judgment, and we just say, do it with mercy. The mercy's already happened. And Onesiphorus did it in Rome. And when he comes to the judgment, let mercy glory in judgment. God will be merciful because he'll remember. It wasn't the fact, I'll be a little merciful here and I'll be a little merciful there. What standard are we going to be judged by? He said, I remember that. I won't forget that. Paul doesn't forget it. God doesn't forget it. And the Lord's showing mercy because he did mercy to me. It becomes important. You don't leave those matters. All the kind things that you do for people will be remembered by God in the judgment. While he's there to judge us by our works, the mercy you extended will be what glories in the judgment. Not that you passed him on the side, not that you went your ways and didn't even think about the condition they're in. When we think about the wisdom that comes from above, James tells us in James 3 and verse 17, where the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy, and good fruits. Easily entreated. Here's something that might be a difficult thing to deal with, but you're coming with fullness of mercy. And you're going to be involved with producing good fruits. That becomes very important. So when you think about that, here's one you can come and talk to. There's one that easily entreated, peaceable, gentle, always pure, going to do what's right with God, but that was in its nature pure. It's not evil intent. That's the kind of wisdom that comes from above. And it's full of mercy. Now, it's interesting. In Matthew 23, you've got the tithing taking place. That's how they give of their means. We find in the New Testament that we're to give as we've been prospered. We're not commanded to tithe, but we give as we've been prospered. That doesn't mean you can't check, well, am I giving as I'm prospering? I wonder if I'm giving 10th of my gross income. Now, I want to figure it out. Find out for yourself. But God doesn't tell you to tithe. He tells you as you prospered. A Jew would end up giving about 30% of his goods when all the tithing was done through the year. But there was a sense of, well, that would be a good starting place. I don't know what it means to prosper. I'm going on my journey. But that becomes something important that you do up front because you honor God. And he said you should not left the tithing away, and we should not leave our contributions away, giving away. But we ought to combine the two in a way that we can grow in good fruits. And Paul addresses that. In 2 Corinthians, the 9th chapter, he's trying to get the Corinthians to finally complete what has been planned about their contribution for the poor saints in Jerusalem. And here he's writing this epistle to encourage them to give liberally with their singleness of heart to God and his cause, and therefore the people of God benefit from it. He said, but this I say in verse 6, if you sow sparingly, you shall also reap sparingly. He that soweth bountifully shall also reap bountifully. That's a principle of God. The question is, do you believe it? Do you believe it? It's a matter of faith. Giving is a matter of faith. And we have to come to times when we may have been prospering and we say, well, am I giving as I should? Well, if you sow sparingly, you're going to reap sparingly. That's true in the grain fields. It's true in the spiritual world too, in our lives. But if you sow bountifully, you'll reap bountifully. And so how does he bring that to our giving? Let each man do according as he purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. Now listen to what he says in verse 10. Again, this sowing and reaping. He that supplies seed to the sower and bread for food, when that seed grows in grain and we have bread for food, but I planted a seed. If you sow that, you don't want to sow sparingly, because if you sow more, you'll get more. But he says, he that supplies seed to the sower, bread for the food, shall supply and multiply your seed for sowing, and increase the fruits of your righteousness. That's wisdom from above. That we are abounding in fruit of righteousness unto God as we express mercy to people. And so we don't want to give sparingly. We give with purpose. And the principle is, and I've seen it in our lives, I didn't think I could give that. And all of a sudden we give that. And God gives us the ability to give more. Because we're not leaving mercy behind. We're indeed wanting to grow in our fruit so we can do more for people. It is stingy people. It's people that care about only themselves that are not going to prosper in the kingdom of God. But we as God's people can always meet what's before us. And think about that in your life. Part of good fruits and growing in good fruits is indeed connected with being full of mercy. And that should be a part of our lives. We're giving. We're giving of ourselves and our lives about being merciful, going that second mile, doing what we can as we are empathetic with members and with people in the world that we come in contact with. And it creates sympathy. We put ourselves with them, but we try to put ourselves there. How does that feel? And what are we going to do? We're going to just pass it by and leave it alone, or are we going to show mercy, kindness? Don't want them to hurt. We do what we can. These doctors of the law, these people who are separated unto God in all their righteousness, they're leaving all this behind. But boy, they could tithe and look good. And they could be involved in straining the neck, because we're not going to have any impurities in our drink. And you swallowed a camel. You're blind. You're blind to the way of God. Faithfulness, or as the word faith is there, And a lot of times it's dealing with being faithful. God is this word faith, but he's faithful. And one of the things we see about him in 1 Thessalonians 5:24 is his promises. He's faithful to keep his promises. And this is a great one, that he's able to keep us and sanctify us wholly in our spirit and our soul and our body. We can keep those three preserved entire without blame. Here we've got our spirit. Here we've got the soul, inward man. We work out our things in the body. The body can do things that are sinful. We can sin in our soul and all that sort of thing. But that kind of tells us what we're made of. Body, flesh, outward man, inward man. He can keep it all preserved without blame until at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Isn't that the ultimate time when one's faithfulness would be important? God, are you faithful? Because I'm next in the judgment. I'm coming up next. Are you faithful? I'm going to talk to you. Are you faithful? And you lived your life and you died with that. He says, faithful is he that calleth you, who will also do it. You can count on it. That's a wonderful blessing. But wonder if you couldn't depend upon your God. The Muslims don't have a concept of God that way. Allah could do what he wants to do on the judgment. They don't have the confidence that we can have in our God, that indeed he's trustworthy, he's dependable, and that's exactly how we're to be in our lives. Over and over again in the New Testament, where Jesus warns about being faithful to your oaths. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. Anything's over that, beyond that, is of the evil one. Oh, we'll swear by the temple. We'll swear by Jerusalem. We'll swear by the heavens. Well, that's where God is. There's this glorious presence in the temple in Jesus' day, in the Old Testament times. And there's indeed Jerusalem, the city of the great king. And the earth is just a stepping, where he keeps his feet propped up in that imagery. You don't escape God when you swear by something. So you might as well keep your oaths. Why? Because God's faithful. And he wants us to be faithful to our word. You know, you may not have a lot of money. You may not have a lot of power. But you are someone special when they can depend upon you and your promises. And you didn't take a lot of money to do that. And it's realizing they've learned that it's not just good intent. I intend to be there, I'll be there, and they're never there. And that becomes something I've learned I can't depend upon them. That's a bad thing. But one of the weightier matters of the law, and that says, that person's dependable. And I can count on them being there, especially in time of need. God is going to help us go to the judgment with joy and confidence because he's faithful. And we're to be faithful to our fellow man. And what's interesting to bring these two together, Luke gives us another way of looking at these passages, this passage we looked at. In fact, he says in Luke 11:42, you're keeping the other matters undone, but what you're keeping undone is justice and the love of God. He didn't say mercy. He didn't say faith or faithfulness. Luke gives the account of justice, which both of them, Matthew and Luke, did. So that's being just with our neighbor, being fair. But the love of God covered the next two. And isn't it interesting that he would be the one that said we show value, we love God, we value him. You know why? Because he's merciful. He's merciful. And he's merciful in saving our souls, as we saw the idea of calling the sinner to salvation. Paul will say in Romans the 9th chapter, when he looks upon man being in their sin, that he might make known to the riches of his glory upon vessels of mercy. These are sinners, which he afore prepared to glory. Verse 22 said, what if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, which he has a right to do in judgment? What if he endured with much long sufferings vessels of wrath fitted unto destruction, and they became vessels of his mercy? He cares about the souls. And when we express mercy, we are expressing we value God so much that it's our love for him. We act that way to our fellow man. And because God is faithful and he's full of mercy, we love God, we value God, that we're going to bring that into our lives. And we're going to have justice, and we're going to have mercy, and we're going to have faithfulness to our promises. Those indeed are the weightier matters of the law. Can you imagine Jesus named all three? He grouped justice. Here's your relationship with man. But here's your relationship with man because you have a relationship with God. You love God. You value his qualities. And they become your qualities as well. That's Matthew and that's Luke. And here they were tithing tiny herbs. You know, all three of those herbs had a fragrance that was wonderful. They smell good. Little tiny stems, 10 of them, belong to God. And what's happening is that it's not that you're blinded, it's that the hypocrite's blind. The hypocrite's blind. He's swallowing a camel. And he's about leaving the weightier matters of the law alone. Okay, poor soul. He just blind. We now see him. I'll tell you what he's blind of too, is in the judgment, he's going to go to hell. That's where a hypocrite goes. And as we read in Matthew 23, verses 13 through 15, they're so blind that they can't see the reality that we who take time to look at the problem of the eyesight of the hypocrite. He says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut the kingdom of heaven against men, for you enter not in yourselves. You don't come into the kingdom of God. And neither do you suffer them that would like to come to allow them to enter in. You're staying away. Got your mask of holiness, and you don't want anything to do with what the law of God truly is. They're not even fulfilling the law of Moses, much less look to Jesus Christ as the one who fulfilled it. They don't enter, and they keep you from it. Similarly, he says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, you compass the land. Go all over the land so you can make one proselyte. Boy, you're industrious for saving souls, aren't you? Oh, yeah, we are. We'd like you to be a member of our sect. To make one proselyte. And when he has become so, you make him twofold more a son of hell than yourselves. That word's Gehenna. That's the place of eternal punishment. It is sad that blind people will go to hell. But they wore the mask. And I tell you where hypocrisy begins. In verse 27 and 28, you're like whited sepulchres. Outwardly, you're white and pure and clean, but inwardly you're full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you should outwardly appear, but you also outwardly appear righteous unto men. But inwardly are you full of hypocrisy and iniquity. You're full of sin. And you don't care. Inside, you do not care if outside you put the mask on and you show one side and you're not that person. You're so blind. Jesus did not have much sympathy. He's had sympathy for people being in sin. But when people are deliberately being blind, that's what I mean. Blind people will go to hell, not because they happened to them and they had no choice in the matter. These people are selective. I will tithe, but I'll leave the weightier matters of the law behind. I will strain out the things that make us impure. I'm eating a camel on the side. They're blind. And they're also blind that they're leading themselves and others that listen to them is leading them to hell, where justice is going to roll and where judgment is going to come upon man. Jesus exposed them so other people would not be captivated to them and being such separatists under the law. They were so far away from it. They're so blind. That's what a hypocrite is. So that should cause us to never want to be a hypocrite. And the reality is, it's not that you're blind, you can't see what I really am. I've taken a look, and you're the one that's blind. Take the mask off and let's come back to the Lord. Let's come to the Lord and realize we can do all of this. We can be very particular in our service unto God. And we can not leave undone the weightier matters of the law, our relationship with one another. There's justice, there is mercy, and there's faithfulness to our promises. And that is indeed part of our relationship with God. And when we do those things, we surely showing we love God and we value Him. It's His character we want to show in our lives. And the things that you do like that, God will remember that in the judgment. Mercy will glory in the judgment. Because we learned, if we were a hypocrite, taking mask off, I don't want to be blind any longer. God knows me. And Jesus knew them, trying to get them to come out of all of that blindness and for those who are captivated by them. And may we always do that. This hypocrisy is not really fooling anybody. But what's sad is that hypocrisy, when it's inside of us, that's where it starts. I can live as a hypocrite and I'm okay with it. Don't ever get to that point. Tonight, if you're not a Christian, we encourage you to be one. Here's Jesus speaking. Here's Him condemning those things, and it's so true. And it helps us to be better people. We might not be what we want to be, but we don't have to be a hypocrite and hiding it. We're all among one another. We sin. We fall short. But we come to God's Word and realize that's not the route to go. I don't want to look good on the outside and still be full of iniquity on the inside. God will cleanse you from the inside. He'll take away the guilt of your sin because of the blood of Christ. Make yourself right. Be pure inside and out tonight. Obey the gospel as we stand and as we sing.